Wow, this meeting is being live streamed. Got it. Click the download button. Wow, meeting is now live on YouTube.
I think, yeah, we are live.
Perfect.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited and to host Yichun Wei, founder of Aiprentices. I got to know about Aiprentices through Nick Cameron and at Perkinsonville and through their collaboration. And then when I looked into the product, it's amazing. It's addressing a challenge which I rarely see AC startups working in that area in construction documentation. And I'm very excited to host Yichun and discuss more about the process and journey. Thanks, Yichun, for coming on the show.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Mayur and Richard for hosting us. I'm really excited, to come on the show, to have a conversation with you and telling you about what we're working on and the thoughts behind it, and perhaps what we are going to make in the future.
Yeah. So, Yichun, you come from like a non-AC background. You did PhD in neuroscience. So I'm curious to know, like, what excited you about this problem in AC?
It's perhaps first gets intrigued and then excited about it. So yes, I married a architect and a very experienced, very great architect, experience of over 15 years. Observing her struggle over the years at every place she worked for, every place has the same challenge of, deliver on time, project-based kind of schedule. So that produces personally a lot of burden, right, to the families. So we have this conversation of what's happening and why would that be the case for architects to work, so much overtime, especially before deadlines. And then that gradually, sort of seeded some ideas between our conversation, and of course it's not there before I talked to a lot of architects, and so gradually, that intriguiness of the problem finally elicited something that we can make, and thinking perhaps that's a one way forward, for the profession. So as time comes by, it's the right time, and then we just jumped off and then try to, get off as do it in a modern way, as if we are, try to influence the world with starting from a very small company.
That's awesome. Like, I can imagine the courage it takes to take up this big challenge. So I think this might be a good time to go deep dive into Aiprentice.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So we are we're trying to survive as a small startup. We develop technology for the AECO industry, to unlock their institutional knowledge and mentor the younger generation that enters profession and bridge that knowledge gap, because that has been observed and talked about a lot. And we also find that knowledge may be used to data drive the construction documentation processes. It may eventually leads to more standardized and automated documents. And I think that would be one thing that's sort of first welcome. And second, we didn't see a lot of people working on it. And that's one of the reasons is perhaps we need to be that person to work on it.
Yeah. So I know you have a presentation lined up. So can you like walk us through the whole journey?
Sure. Let me share my screen. Here.
Perfect.
Okay. Yeah, so here, I plan to use this deck to guide through our conversation, especially about what we make, and also, serve as a basis for discussion. And it's something that I haven't delivered anywhere, so could be very rough in places. Cool. So first, why do we focus on documentation? Nick Cameron from Perkinsville has been telling us that 40% of the design fees and time being spent on construction documents. It's the revenue, but it's also a lot of man hours. And also recently, I've been into this AU session. First, there's very few sessions in AU about documentation. So few that the people here, this person is asking in the chat that why when we observe over 65% of the production time spent on drawings, but we see very few automation efforts for drawings. Right. So the question comes at one view of the drawings or say decisions made in the design phase. When we look at it, there's design decisions and documentation decisions. Design decisions is where architects feel like you have value add in there, and you have differentiated brand. But documentation is your legal binding contract documents. You hand over, you deliver them. And you have liabilities as a participating in the construction. And if you look at a lot of decisions, small tasks, involved in the two parts, design and documentation, we find why the process was painful. It's because each time when design changes on the left-hand side, on the documentation side, you would need time to catch up with it. It's not an instant effort. And that effectively prevents the design from being iteration. You basically cannot iterate. That was the problem that we observed in the practice. I'm not sure if everyone agree with it. At least that's our sort of learning from the field. Okay, so let's look at what's in those documents. Here is a choice for you. Where do you think you fall on this spectrum? Question is, what do you make? Are you making the contents like in newspaper, books, albums, movies, or even games, that it's the same content delivered to many consumers? Or are you making things like, software? It is complex, so you require usually a team to complete. It's perhaps in large quantity, and this is the first programmer for Apollo, and this is her code, of course, printed on paper. Still a lot of paper, but what do you think you are making as the architecture practice? For example, what does Perkinsville make? Do you make content, or do you make content here, or do you make software here? So what's your take, Maria?
It falls like in between, like it's not like black and gray. So we have some part which we make media, but also some part which we make software. So.
Thank you. So let me make the argument to you that I think you are making software, not a content. So here's an analogy that I want to draw between architectural design and to those in software design. So software design on the left-hand side is software processes. You also software design process, software development processes where you have source code, text source code, and then built by a compiler. And then you get either your executables or apps on the left-hand side. But on the right-hand side is you have a set of drawings that architects produce, or somebody produces, right? You've got to be designers, okay? And then built by the general contractor, and then you get your building. Notice the same word build is being used on both sides. And you can see the analogy between the two processes. And you can imagine similar challenges could be there too. If you have, let's say, buggy code that does not even conform into the syntax, the compiler is going to stop and pause and say, look, you had a bug in there. I cannot get you your executable app. So similarly, if you have buggy design, GC is going to slap your wrist and say, well, I'll slap you with a RFI or maybe change of order. I'm just going to pause on the construction site. And, the difference is really that the build process in the construction is really expensive than software. Software will be okay. I can wait for some seconds and then maybe just scratch whatever buggy stuff that I have and go back to modify my design here. But here for architects, it's really expensive for everyone to go back. So it's even more important for architects to get it right when you deliver your design. So here I try to argue to you that you are making the software. So also anecdotally, we have heard that approaching deadlines, especially in deadline before you deliver either software or a set of construction drawings. The teams or architecture firms oftentimes add architects into the team, and that doesn't tend to work out so well. And we hear the same story on software side. If you double the team size in software, your productivity does not double. And you perhaps does not get even 1 day quicker in delivery. So that's why I try to use this argue to you that you are making software. But recently, at least we know in the 1980s, software development was not so much better than AEC design, architecture design today. It is painful, slow. But we have been hearing recent years, right? A lot of the talking about how software has been increasing their productivity, but not so much for AEC design. Architecture design or even construction is very, very slow, and you didn't get much of the boost in productivity. So the idea would be perhaps we could look at what do software developers do to perhaps save them or bootstrap themselves out of originally also a very slow and painful process. It's not to say that it's not painful today, but things has changed quite a bit. So the first thing we hear when anyone start to learn do software, that is a dry principle. In other words, do not repeat yourself. It's about succinctness. It's about a single source of truth, about separation of concern. That's the words that you're hearing continuously if you start to do any software development. The actual original dry principle actually says this: every piece of knowledge must have a single unambiguous authoritative representation within the system. So for a software developer, a system actually means the whole repository they have or the project they're working on. Now think about, this is too original formula of this principle, but I want to ask you, does it sound familiar to you as an architect or as a designer? This single source of truth, or say every piece of knowledge, has to have a single representation thing. Having cleared it, when you're doing construction documents, don't you being advised that you want to document one thing at one place for only once, right? It's the same principle. For example, dimension. You want to dimension one thing at one place at one time, and text. Why? Because if you want to make any updates, you do not want to go to every sheet and update that. You want to update one place, and that is your source of truth that you've done your job. So look, here I'm trying to argue to you that what you are making is software. Okay, and also applying this process across. Okay, for them. So here, let me show you something. This is kind of confusing too. On the left-hand side, I'm showing you one typical what software people calling as application architecture. Not they call them architecture. Okay, and I'm quoting Mies van der Rohe, a famous architect, what he has said before. It says architecture starts when you carefully putting two bricks together. So here, perhaps you can understand why do those software developers, call them architects themselves. Their title actually has architects in there. It's actually because they are putting blocks together. You can see the blocks over there. And now that's why. If you do a call out here, that's interface between the two blocks. it is actually documenting, the actual implementation actually needs to document how the two blocks interact together. If I really does a call out similar to the joins, you see there's interaction happening between two blocks, and the software developer really has to go in using source code to document how that happens. It's not very different from, this is a typical parapet detail where it's actually documenting how does the walls and the roof goes together, and perhaps some more than two elements with the panels. I mean, how do they put together? So in the scene of analogy of parallel here, this is why I try to argue to you that you are making software. So not content, at least not something delivered to many, many consumers. Of course, there are companies who build a lot of units out of a few, like room plan A, room plan B, room plan C. Where do we fall on that spectrum? Yeah, I don't need to mention. Yes. So also applying that do not repeat yourself principle across projects, that actually will get you reuse of your source code. And that's what's happening in the software development so much over the years. And I think that's why where it's crucial for the software developers to gain their productivity. So imagine I'm one developer was tasked about finally implement this interaction between the service agent and services. Well, just think of it as bricks. What I'm going to do, even as an experienced software developer, first I'm going to look at how did people done before. I want to see, can you give me an example of how similar things has been done before, right? Well, do they have such a thing? This is GitHub. Well, I can imagine, well, in order to do that task, you got to do something, as a software developer, I know you have to download this, maybe post a thing. Well, let's just search for post it thing, await, post a thing. And then GitHub's going to give me, hundreds of thousands of hits, especially for this person in this project at this location. I wrote that they wrote that line, and they wrote that line, and with the context. Well, that is a solution. That person that came up, maybe collectively or individually, as a solution to that problem. And for me, as someone who wants to accomplish similar things, I may actually copy this, to my source code and then modify it and use it. And perhaps I decide not to do it, not to use this, but I sort of read how they do it and go back to start from scratch. It's all my interpretation, but obviously I was influenced by how people have done this before. I learned, it's a learning process to me. Either it's a reminder how people have done before if I was not fresh in memory, or I actually didn't know, but I actually read how people do it and then I learn it and then do it in my projects. Now question becomes, do we have such a thing in AEC for us to search something, in your solution and reach at a solution like this, reach at your solution? Do we have it? If we don't have it, can we have it? Or could AEC actually get there collectively? So this is what we came about. So about a little more than 1 year ago, actually in the beginning of 2019, 2020, before the pandemic, Nick Cameron from Perkins had reached out to us with this challenge that the industry has over 100 years of the knowledge, right, encoded in your construction documents. You have delivered, you have figured it out. In those details, texts, views, annotations everywhere. But for each project, you're still starting from scratch, more or less. And those knowledge, it either disappeared or embedded in people's heads. They moved on. And what are firms being left with? Right? Not so many, except those drawings. And we think there are a lot of data embedded in there, and those data are reflected or embedded in your, or used. That is like a sort of conclusion of your interpretation of code. your solution to constructability problems, and let's say your choice of material. So a lot of those challenges was you have figured it out, you have your conclusion or solutions in there. We call it institutional knowledge in the past projects, and this is what we want to build out of to help firms preserve it. So Artifact was something very similar to Google in interface. You just type in what you want to search, and we help you to land on the solutions that you have figured out from your past projects. And of course, we tell you, similar to GitHub, we tell you on which sheet, on which detail number, which project, and of course, perhaps you can find by who that have ended up with a solution. And on the left-hand side, I was highlighting a few of the search terms, which I really think is called a software. We want to call it, frame it as architecture search. Why? Because it contains multiple items. You are searching for CMU and door. You want to get a solution of putting CMU walls and doors together. You want to, if you search for metal wall, panel, and parapet, you want to have a solution of how you put the panel and the parapet together. So it's you search by anything you sort of can relate in that solution and land on the solution itself. Well, on left-hand side is today or previously what's happening at each firm when people try to reuse or find that knowledge, about the 9 steps. And in each of that step, you may actually stop because it's not feasible to you. On the right-hand side is with Artifact. You search and you download the solution before. Well, similar to a GitHub fashion. Now, perhaps you are well equipped to answer the question, why do we see so few automation efforts for drawings? In order to answer that question, perhaps we just look at the left-hand side, the software side. Do software has a lot of automation? The answer is maybe yes. A lot of them in what they call continuous integration or continuous delivery. It's not actually automating the source code, the way to do the source code, but really the process. Well, in the AEC side, we have model check or Beam Manager every night running something, or Clarity to print your PDF. That's part of that. But also software has something called a code generation. Basically, it is automation. It allows a developer to write in a higher abstraction with shorter code, smaller, fewer code. But then either compiler plus preprocessor, will write a lot of code for you, and that actually is suitable to feed it into the compiler to produce your final outcome. On the AEC side, any of those generative design, Hyper falls into that category. But over the years, is it really a very big opportunity? Well, if it's very easy to do, software guys, as you know, without those burden in hardware or construction side, they will do it first, right? Yes, actually code generation has been done, but we have, software engineer developers has been putting effort trying to generate code, either, produce higher level language with more higher abstract. Those are all of those efforts. So the answer will be yes, there are opportunities there. But question is, today, so much code is still being written manually. You cannot automate everything out. And then what's ever left is whatever today in every software engineering job that people are still being doing is coding manually. Yes, perhaps you are coding a higher abstraction. There's something helping you to write, down to the this machine code in the end. But again, compiler arguably is doing that job. In IEC, we haven't seen much of the effort there, and also you can perhaps understand why the graphical programming environment like Dynamo or even Rhino. To what extent they can help? Well, definitely they are an integral part of it. But in the end, if what you are doing is software, you are coding with the drawings. What they do really is, at least in the software world, was not yet the mainstream. But it's a ever ongoing self-propelling effort to automate it. It's not going to be seen, carefully. But if any of those automating efforts solve the problem so well, the whole profession is going to move on to that platform, and the people are still saying they're manually doing things, of course, in a higher abstraction. But what's really happening so much, and also code generation automation is what we call reuse. Well, code generation is reusing the expertise that you have done before, right? Well, Hyper seems to be also taking that, proposal. But also let's look at how reuse has been done in a large picture in software. Reuse happens in components. This is happening in the architectural design. Earlier, you have lines in AutoCAD, but today you have elements 2D or 3D in being design environments. And software libraries, it's a bunch of code, package it up so that you can sort of build your software based on it. That's something we haven't seen a lot in the architectural design. Perhaps that's the direction that you can take, is to make libraries of design, perhaps more standardized versions of commonly used spaces. For example, restrooms. Maybe you have libraries of it, right? That's something we think Artifact could help. Granted, today a lot of software libraries are hosted on GitHub, but perhaps if we are actually building GitHub for construction drawings, maybe that's where you can host your libraries on. And also, design patterns is a common solution to common problems, right? Do we have it? Well, think about the Revit templates you have. Maybe not so, maybe it can be better, but those are the starting point for the problems you have. And also frameworks. This we didn't see much, but we can talk more about it. Okay, so here is a typical, again, a software architecture of a typical software today. Look at what this example of reuse by software libraries. So look at on the right-hand side, different building blocks. So what I want to tell you is that today, when the software, team trying to build the software, what do they use? They actually do not rebuild those building blocks. Those building blocks was actually supplied by, library developers. A lot of them open source. So they have devoted very little in coming up with those building blocks. The most of focus was actually on how to put them together. That means those arrows. Those were actually the most of those code today that developers doing those, we call it glue code or whatever code. They actually putting the blocks together. And of course, they focused on client-facing side. And this perhaps will be what architectural design will eventually become, is perhaps you are going to focus on client-facing side more, and because that's what your value add. But you use a set of standardized building block, which constitutes box of your construction documentation. But finally, you sort of have your own very special designs based above those very standard components, and that's how building seems to be like you have very special outside looking, but internally it seems very similar. But really, they're similar doesn't mean they are easy, because you still do the job of putting them together. So that's what we think. It's a very nice model, and why you are making software. Okay, so we have gone through this. Let's share to you. Let me share to you of our take on automation, because automation is another way. Actually, is one kind of reuse. Is reuse your previous experience, and we think that can only be done with data-driven fashion. After you look at how things have been done before, and we have seen these two slides. So we think automation can be done to a lot of decisions that's been made, not those design decisions, but the documentation decisions. How do you document one set of design? So we do not want to sort of enforce how architects want to design things. Although we see a lot of startups or innovations in that side trying to help you generate design. But people have been telling me they didn't see, technology or AI or machine learning has been used, to as a completer. Let's let human do the design, but gave us a CD button. Press the button, sort of you can have your documentation done, and then you can really start to iterate on your design. So that's why we focus on that. And of course, the having artifacts, to organize your data, to make everything to be data driven. That's what we think is possible to reach that. So first of the challenge we think that's possible was to mock up the entire set, and by doing that, we can measure the project delivery process more precisely, only with the knowledge of how many work has been involved in the past projects. So here we've identified a few things we're working on. Here on the left-hand side is showing you every section view that you cut in your model. And we are here trying to document, at least in our database, characterizes every of this section cut, which edge or say which relationship do they document. And if we have that, perhaps we can answer to you how many of the edges on the exterior wall of those edges you have not yet documented according to the model, okay, according to your design. But if you have a principle that you want to adhere to a criterion or a standard in terms of documentation, then we can measure to you how much work you have not yet done. And that's something that we think no one in this industry has done before. And that's one of the reasons why the project is based on arbitrary deadlines. And that's why every one of the architects, right, approaching deadline, perhaps you are not clear how much work is still involved there. And we want to move the profession, forward to measuring the actual work yet to be done, but not by the very arbitrary estimate of 50% of CD, 50% of SD, but we want to make that number to be a more measured, more data-driven part. And only by doing that, in the end, we perhaps can produce something that generates those section cut for you. If we finally find that those were done following a certain principle in your past data, for various project types. And of course, solving the naming convention problems where you can imagine we just erase every of those few names here and try to produce it, right? Try to reproduce it. Why would a human be required to produce those names, right? If those are really named in a stereotypical fashion. Well, we are actively using a variant of our artifacts, to harvest those data and building up graph connections and trying to characterize those problems. A lot of them is in the graph neural network side is to predict whether or not a link exists or to predict the properties of a node. So those are the ways that we think we could capture that data and could answer questions. In the end, it could answer the question, where should what sections go? Perhaps also answer your question, where should I make the in-logic plan and where should I do the call-outs? Those are not very hard problems, actually, but we didn't see people working on it. But if we can produce that progression of the logics in the documentation, perhaps we can have, more than what your Revit templates do today. Get you to a point of you are done doing those documentation with informed past. That those are how does the documentation set come together? Is the institutional knowledge, and today you do require somebody to have that knowledge in their head to sit in your desk to have this done. What if we have externalize this, and this would be something that could be captured by the data if it's really been done in a consistent fashion. Okay, so that's the hope. And with data-driven side, we actually have small products coming up. For example, architects been telling us they have been continuously drawing these outlines for each of the interior elevations. And once the design changes, they have sort of have to go back to redraw that station, which I see a lot laughing. I don't know if you have that experience.
Yeah,
But
I have, and I have asked some senior authority, what is this? Are we gonna make everything like, curved, craft it? And yeah, this is a solution, it seems.
yes, this is what we make when we just get into this industry, that we hear people talking about. They do not want to draw that outline. Yes, we go in and we make the automation. So maybe previously it takes 3 minutes or 5 minutes. Now take 2 seconds. Noted. You may thought it's an easy problem, but it's not. Or it could be either if everything's closed, but there are cases where it's actually open. You know, what do you decide to go? You trace it up or trace it to the left-hand side? It is actually a data problem. You have to really look at what people do in different situations to find and make that decision. So this is how it sort of taught us you need to make it data-driven. So this product right now running on people's desktop, helping them crop the interior elevation. So we are gradually going up with the data-driven part. Right now it's mostly like data-driven me to write that code and then to have it. But then second generation will be totally data-driven. All right. And also this is actually what we started with, is trying to make a sort of assistance to the dimension. But then we quickly find out without data telling us where and what is to be dimensioned, and in a dimension string, you have a start and an end. Where do you start? Where do you end? It's actually a data-driven problem. It's a data problem that you will need to collect and read through data. Asking a question, how could a entry-level architects or designers do this job? You go to previous drawings to learn it too, right? Yes, you go through NCAP. NCAP will tell you some principle you need to follow. Maybe you should dimension one thing in one place, but maybe you still need to look through drawings, to really get this stuff. So that's the setup point of what we want to take. By having product like the artifact and technology behind it, perhaps we gain access to data. Like here, we are trying to focus on documentation data and see if those things can be automated. Cool. In the end, we think perhaps 80% of the efforts or time we put in documentation, we think maybe they were done in a consistent fashion, that it could actually, in a data-driven fashion, be automated, not in a strictly codified sense, but in a data-driven fashion, with pretty high accuracy rate could be automated. And perhaps you will have that city button to some extent. Okay, so that's all I have. I have about 40 minutes-ish, so too long. Yeah,
that's a great presentation, Yichun. I felt like it's a keynote level presentation at a conference. Like, you did amazing job at explaining the whole process. And if I were an investor, I would have been like considering seed or like venture investing. It's a great product.
Yes, we are a very small startup. We actually hasn't raised any venture funding, but just thinking that the direction we are going is what people need was sufficient to propel us to continue down the road. And especially thanks to Perkins World, Nick Cameron and the amazing Digital Bucks team, Luke, Mario, Jeremy, was very important, starting trigger that led us onto this journey. So it's not only us. We had a lot of friends in the industry, and we are eager to have more.
I see. So I wanted to ask a question on, so for the artifact search feature, how did you like solve the problem? So we have details in Revit and now it's searchable. So what was the data conversion process, and like how are you extracting those metadata which are searchable?
Well, it's not a process that's done. Okay, so we are continually perfecting that process. first we extract all of the bin information, whatever information we have, parameters, that is in a Revit sense, and all the annotations you put in, because right, the business has hired architects carefully making those texts, clause, legends. Those are part of the solution. So we obviously the first step is to have those in there, but also we are it's in the end it becomes a tagging effort where we are looking at more intelligent, higher level tagging. For example, perhaps you didn't have the project type tagged in there. We are adding those too. So it could be first manual, but in the end, it could be generated by machine learning. So there's a lot of places to make search better. And either in the interface side or the actual things that you can reach at. The search on the software side also evolves. You have first to have GitHub search, and then people, in the source graph says, okay, we have better, smarter search. Well, this is a space you can actually grow quite a bit.
Got it. Like, I'm just curious to know your thoughts on this. Like, what if there are drawings, like detailed drawings from old buildings, and you just have blueprints, you don't have BIM model? How can those blueprints can be scanned and integrated into Artifact?
Well, blueprints or even PDF drawings, we are building the harvester on Forge so that you can only click. Right now, it's not yet ready, but when it's ready, you can sort of select your project in BIM 360 and have Forge to harvest it, or you can connect. It depends on where you store your blueprints, right? Connect it to Artifact, and then we sort of fire up Cloud Harvester to read through it. And it depends on what format your design is in. It could be in Autodesk format, or perhaps other formats, PDFs, or other software package. It's really a separate part of it that it needs to be built. The endpoint is it's not automatic. It's in the software development point of view, we have to build it when you need it, of course.
Got it. And what has been the most challenging part of this, like, product development?
Well, it's a very good question. Yeah, what's been challenging part? Well, it's because software engineer is also sort of specialized. I, as a software engineer, work on some stuff, not necessarily everything that's needed in the project. So the part that's challenging was for me to learn the part that I didn't know, and use it. Well, GitHub learning will actually help quite a bit. That's how the software engineer learn to do things that they haven't done before. So look, it's possible. I just say, look, it's possible with such product, GitHub type of product, or Stack Overflow. It's another place we go ask questions. And we don't have that in the AEC, right? Well, GitHub plus Stack Overflow was really, capturing the knowledge. And that's something we think is lacking right now in AEC. And it's something we try to build.
That's great. And can you break down a bit more on the process you mentioned about, like, automating section cut in the model? Like, how do you do it?
Well, for the section cut part, right now we are still only in the process of reading through your current design, seeing where the sections were cut, and characterize those sections. Of course, once we have enough data, to train a model, we plan to train a graph neural network model that to capture because the sections were you can consider it as the connections between nodes. Each node will be different walls or different elements in the model, and where you cut that section captures a set of nodes you want to sort of document. So we want to capture that with what will be the sub network that you want to have for each one of those sections. So I'll give you a network of the elements in your BIM model, Tell me if you can find a sub network that you think should be captured on one view. So that's a very general way to frame it. We didn't know would the data support that type of query or question to be answered, but we are fairly confident in that. We think the documentation were done in a way that's very stereotypical. Granted, look, you had a criterion, right, for the government to stamp a permit on it. You sort of, the contractor needs to be able to build it. So that documentation needs to satisfy some criteria. And we think that that's perhaps some consistent part that could be captured by machine learning with those data. Of course, we're just proposing to do it. We do not yet deliver anything that is capable at this moment.
Got it. And what kind of collaborations are you looking forward to from the industry?
Well, first was if you buy the argument that you are making software and you want to make software better, make your job, accomplish your job better, perhaps become one of our users will be a very direct way to collaborate and telling me what do you want in addition to what you see in our product. Being a very early product, there's many directions or many different ways to prioritize what we build. Being a user would be the most straightforward way, to sort of shape how this goes. Maybe if you are confident, you feel like you are helped by this. As every month we have hundreds of users in per control. If you are listening to this, if you feel like this helps you, maybe talk to your colleagues, right? Maybe outside of firm. If they can be helped, maybe let them know that this could be a possibility.
Awesome. And yeah, like building upon that, if someone is interested, how can they reach out to you?
Well, you can reach us from our website, aiprentice.com, where the name comes from our initial setup point. We want to make AI as doing apprentice level job for you. Yeah, pretty much a website will be where you can find us.
Got it. What's on your vision for this product in next 2-3 years down the line? How do you foresee AI Apprentice?
Well, yeah, first we try to become a knowledge base, for to capture AUC's knowledge. Now separating different firms. Of course, probably begin as a proprietary repositories for each of the firms. Perhaps a few small firms or small or individual practitioners would like to maybe share your solutions on their, like, open source products in open source code in the software side. We would encourage you to do that because we think that the profession to move forward quicker, maybe you can benefit from shared solutions. Those solutions may not directly apply to your current project, but you can sort of adapt it, learning from it, right? So that's something we imagine we can help in the next 2 or 3 years, is to build up the reuse part of it, helping people to reuse a bigger and bigger part of your design, starting perhaps from drafting reuse or detailed solutions you have in details, perhaps maybe rooms, but those really, we need to solve a lot of problems, to copying stuff from one place to another. It's not easily copyable right now. Today, in the software you have in Revit, you cannot easily copy stuff because it's 3D, it's related to a lot of stuff. Then, building up a package of those designs, and perhaps you will have modularized design, not necessarily modularized construction, but your design, especially for those very typical space, could be modularized. And those could sort of save you a lot of effort in your next project. Maybe not your project, but your colleague's project too.
What makes me curious here is, like, when you talk about this product. Sorry to cut you, you were saying something.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. So if this product we're talking about, is it for like a specific company and that company gonna use it as a plugin or a web-based tool, and not like a whole ecosystem of architects, they can come and pull out some details. So how it gonna be?
Well, it depends on how people decide to use it, right? If every company only is going to have private repositories for search index in there, then yes, then architects join a company, then you can search for all of the data or expertise this company had put in there. Yes, perhaps you didn't see any free public available ones. But as I said, if there are people around in the profession wanting to share those, then everyone in profession gets that knowledge and being there ready to be read, to be learned. We don't know how this thing will go. It really depends on the community, how the community is going to use it. So we hear, currently, it seems to be the case that architecture firms think those drawings were, copyrighted. You have your own sort of, you own everything inside the box. Then if that's the case, then well, okay, you can have a private repository. On the GitHub, at least on GitLab, used to be you can really have a lot of private repositories. Yeah, but similar arguments as what has happened in the software side. Perhaps practices is going to find out, repetitively work on those details, those solutions may actually be a burden, be a cost, rather than a differentiating point for your value add. So maybe it's better to be outsourced or put it outside. Then the cost will be a burden for the whole community, for the whole profession to have. And then maybe every practice will eventually spend very little effort, to use those very standardized details. And the whole curation of the details, updating it, will be when it become a community effort and not something every business, every architecture design business has to pay for in the sense of the business. But it's going to be a common knowledge embodied somewhere in the cloud, accessible to everyone. And as a whole, then the whole profession, can get rid of, not say get rid of, but being freed from a lot of such burden, to move faster forward. Perhaps look, we need to build architects on Mars. We need to build architecture on Mars. We need to build architecture in many, many places, Africa, and perhaps in the Antarctica. If we are always burdening us, with repeating the efforts, building that design, figure out that design again and again, when do we have time to figure out those new designs that maybe actually needed? Could be different, right? On the Mars, on the Antarctica, on those very special weather, maybe the details has to be different. We need to have 3 hour time to think about those new problems. But if we have figured out something from our current practice, it is a wealth for the humankind, and it's actually an honorable thing to put in there. That's how open source has been growing. Was people were getting credit to putting stuff on there, and it's their work, their time, and they were actually getting rewarded by different ways. Maybe not monetary, but recognition, and having something that's been recorded for the humankind. And maybe it's a lot of open source commercial projects in there. So it's not that you just cannot get monetary payback if you put the stuff out.
So when we talk about like right now, if I talk about most of the companies, they have a certain way of naming convention or representing the same data in multiple formats. So like, okay, we get the detail outsource and everything, and it's sorry, outsource, my bad, open source. But when it comes to their own, like the internal part of it, like what the people in there, the firm express their ways in their drawings, that is different for every firm. That is like a collaborative community part of thing, very close community part of thing. So how are we going to deal with that? Like, you're getting my point, right? Like, when we have open source, we downloaded a detail, but then it comes to their representation, what the community is for. So how are we going to deal with that? It will be like specific to that particular group of people, or what are you looking towards, like, if you have ever thought of this?
Well, I only have very primitive thoughts about this. So yes, that's why reusing was easier within a group, within a company, because the company perhaps would prefer to have a certain set of convention. You may want to use a set of the components that you think are more suitable, and you think you want to continue using that in your future projects. And maybe another entity will be more resistant to adopt it. That's definitely the case. And we think perhaps this will be, software has the same thing. People prefer to use their own libraries that in the earliest time, there are rewrite efforts all over the place coming up with their own library because they have more control or whatever. But perhaps in the end, collectively, if the interest for very standardized part was actually cost, then maybe the whole profession, different company will eventually come down to the same set of components or families. If we talk about Revit, 2D families, I mean, maybe, and then because more standards is more reusable, the whole argument was to be being in the, think of yourself as a software consulting business. You are writing a software delivered to your customer. The more standardized parts you can use in your software, the faster, maybe higher quality you can have. So it's to your interest to use more standardized part, but focusing your value add at that very special that you can sort of use it to convince your customer or your client actually. In this world, we should call it client.
Yeah, I think that also brings up like a point that in order for, like, let's say, more machine learning driven automation, we need those open source data sets of this building details. We need like a movement of where maybe every firm or people share some part of their details, and collectively it becomes a good data set where you could do querying or some like machine learning training on it.
Yeah, it's an interpolation between the drawings. So I still remember my year when we first met, you were suggesting, can we build this language model where you just say what type of detail you want, I really draw it out for you. Well, that's not going to be the case if we don't have data, right? Yes, we need quite a bit of details and language description of it. Then with the clip type of the model that we build a connection between the two, and maybe eventually then architects can just name, okay, I want a detail of a parapet, but with some special case, and then poof, you get put out of your data set, or with a certain of interpolation between similar ones, and then maybe that one satisfy requirement. Yeah, those are all very fancy, forward-looking thing. But really, the first step is have the data and try to reuse it. Remember, you are making software, so you want to make more standardized parts and then build upon it. Well, the software industry, we see researchers right now, start to use machine learning, try to write code, but it's in a very early phase. So I'm keep an eye open for what's happening over there. And I do think what's missing here was not necessarily right there, but really in your everyday practice, think of yourself as making software.
Got it. And like one thought I had is it would be quite interesting to have like AI apprentices plugin in Bluebeam for auto dimensioning, because a lot of times we deal in those PDF editor for RFI and like quick feedback. One question I have is it possible for you to show like a real-time demo, because I used this tool and the UI UX was great, and I'm not sure it came out from that GIF. So I think it would be awesome.
Yeah, so yeah, I could definitely demo this. Let me, so you can see my screen, right?
Yep.
So here, um, so 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 typically, if I had a task of doing the drawing the wall and the wall section, then that example would be I want the intersection. How do I put CMU wall and door together? So I need those details. Sharing on screen, it may become slower. Well, then those are all of the details between interface between doors and CMU walls, and maybe actually door head. Let's see. Then those are door heads details. If I go to one of them here, sort of, it's kind of like a Google image search, but what you land on is actually a solution. I would more intended to think of this as GitHub. And you get this solution, and we also show you information of where this appear. It's in this on this particular sheet in this particular projects. And of course, if you click this, we bring you to a Google map of where that is. Perhaps you will find the building photos. And of course, we would like to actually being able to allow you to throw in construction photos down there so that you know, oh, this is on the drawing. And then in the reality, how it's been constructed, how it looks like from the construction site. But those are sort of in a future plan. Okay. Yes, and you can also click on this to go to a sheet. If we have harvested the sheet for you, and if you click on this, it's every detail on that sheet. It's been showing up here. But if we have okay, here is that sheet. So sort of you can, like in a second, find out in your past project which project you have solved that problem and the context around it. Okay, so that's pretty much it. As I said, it's a very simple product to use, and that sort of constitutes our demo. Of course, if you find the detail, you can sort of build up your design. You have here. I have a bunch of collections. So this is door detail, right? It's a door detail. Okay, I'm door head detail. I switch to my playlist. It's like your Spotify playlist of doors, and then I can sort of. This means this detail hasn't been added, so I add it here. So in the future, perhaps I could. I have my door collection, doors detail collection. I've just added here. Perhaps I can send it over to my more senior guy. Says, hey, do you think this detail I use is right? Or maybe the senior guy can compose this list and tell the team, hey, those are details we need to use in this project. And those are probably the project architect's tasks. And actually, project architects are our most ardent, repetitive user coming back to this app because they were responsible for putting the buildings together and to use the right collections of details. Right now, at least at this moment, this product was building for the project architects and project managers too. In the future, of course, we hope this can become a platform for to commute, right, to transfer the knowledge. Project architects transfer your knowledge to every member inside the team, so that you are on the same page. So that's how we see this can get better.
Yeah, like this gives a totally different impression of how easy it is to search it, manage it, and annotate it. Like that, the amount of time like a person can save in using this, like I could foresee it.
Right, and also you can sort of filter it down. As a designer, I may be interested in. Okay, yes, I see the door CMU or CMU door details, or maybe door head, but I particularly want to know. Those are the projects. Here you get a list of projects that have down to such detail. And those numbers are actually the number of door details in that project that is doorhead CMU details. You can sort of, let's only look at bed tower addition, and those are the doorhead details inside that project. You can sort of filter down in that, or maybe look at everyone together. And maybe I want to look at only detail views, and that's in Revit it's called drafting view. Or maybe I want to look at the doorhead CMU in a section. Or maybe I want to look at in a detail view. Okay, so that's and of course you filter by imperial. Okay, so we know without any filtering, let's give this filter. We know doorhead detail, CMU detail coming in 3 different scale. Imperial ones, of course, metric ones are very little in our database, but imperial ones, most of the doorhead CMU detail are in the scale of 3 inches to 1 feet. So now I only look at the 35 cases. But what if you wonder what's really happening to those, or even bigger scale? Then okay, so those are actually not detailed. Those are actually it's a doorhead CMU in the notes. So those are not drawings, but in the notes. But there are actually 5 in drawings too. Okay, so in these several drawings, they are doorhead CMU detail, but they are in a different scale. Yeah, so perhaps we could learn why it's in a different scale. Maybe it's in this project. It maybe have a special type of convention that we want to put in such a detail in a different scale, and maybe that's not. And maybe this one is door frame detail. Yeah, maybe then it's justifiable. Sort of you can go to, if you click projects, sort of you could then land on all of the details inside that projects. Okay, so if I remove the filter of the scale, if I remove the filter of the units, then I land on all of the views inside that project. It's Louis Anderson. So, and if it's one project, you can sort of go through project with the sheets. Okay, so the sheet number, and then on the number, how many of the views are in there. This can get better. Actually, we could only show you once you harvest only sheets, you can just look through sheets like this. This could perhaps help you in the sort of mixed workspace where it's not feasible for you to drive to the office to find a physical drawing to look through, and maybe you can look through it here. Of course, it's perhaps equivalent to you to flip through PDFs. But look here, you can search for things and look at how comparable projects are doing it. So those filters were updated in real time according to the search results. So that's what I want to say. Yeah. And we are, well, there's a lot of improvements we have in our mind, to make this filter easier to be added. But those are software development sort of topics. So I'm not going to discuss too much here. It's really a typical software development. There's nothing fancy here.
Yeah, like I love the product, and like one thing I have noted is like Yichun is very supportive in terms of if you need any custom feature, or if you want to develop some features together with your team and the product. He has like amazing like support, and you could rely and like get awesome development together. So cool.
Yeah,
I have few.
go
Sorry,
ahead.
I was just saying like it's almost more than an hour, so we could wrap up the interview with some light questions.
Please.
So so from your experience outside AC industry and working in AC industry, what are some process apart from construction documentation you feel there is a room for improvement?
This perhaps I'm not the best person, to answer this. I'm not architects that have practiced, so I really rely on the architects around me to tell me what do they want. And the documentation seems to be the one that we repeatedly hearing, and not too many people are working on it. But perhaps every firm is working on it individually. So we think perhaps it's worth to share a different angle, a different approach, and if we have something that's usable, sharing it will be helpful. Other than documentation, that's a really good question. I haven't thought about that a lot, so perhaps I can come up with an answer later.
No problem. What's your favorite book?
Favorite book? Well, trying to do a startup, I do not have time to read any book that's not about the product I'm building. But when I was young, I've read the Asimov and iRobot. That sort of elicited my interest in building smart machines, especially useful ones. I read about Paul Graham's essay. Sort of, it taught me about making something people want and make the world better by building something that hasn't been built before, about startups. And I also read about Peter Thiel's 0 to 1. It's about building new things. Because essentially what you're trying to do is to build something that nobody has done before. Very weirdly, right? You wouldn't think such a thing hasn't been done before. So when we land on it, so I really need to to work very hard at it, to build it, because really we see various of content management system, towards beam management, but really the knowledge aspect hasn't been addressed so much, I would say. And the whole process hasn't been looked at as a software development type of process. And that's something that it's also something we learned working on this project. It's not, I get this idea first day when I get to see it, but more and more we tend to think in that way. And I hope you find it reasonable to think this way.
Yeah, I love 0 to 1 book. It's amazing. Which city is in your travel bucket list?
Chicago. The Great Fire happened more than a century ago. Had sort of triggered the biggest building construction boom in American history. And Chicago has been central part in a lot of new things in construction coming out. The first steel frame high-rise building was built there. The skyline of Chicago will be among the tallest in the world. I haven't visited Chicago before, and I have amazing colleagues, Mayur, and everyone in Perkins-Will, the digital practice in there. haven't visited Chicago before. I hope I can pretty soon. We submitted a proposal for IIA 2022. That's going to happen in Chicago. If we get selected, I'll definitely pay a visit there. I hope I can be there soon.
For sure. We will definitely plan something when you visit here. And lastly, how does a day in your life look like?
Oh, well, yeah, I'm a night person. So every night when kids went to bed around 10-ish, I start to try to focus, and when no one can interrupt me, I start to try to focus on coding and, being a software engineer, try to have, 4 or 5 hours of uninterruptible time before I went to bed. Luckily, my wife handles kids in the morning when she send them to school, and then in the morning is being split to many small pieces. So I do not try to code in the morning. Try to handle more like business side of thing, outreach, email, videos, the podcast, or even like the meetings and like video module you're putting out. A lot of those I do it in the morning. I hear the same story with architects. When architects sit down and trying to do work, you actually need to, flip through things, read around and look around. And then after maybe an hour, you make that change. It's very similar to what software engineer does. I mean, it takes perhaps an hour to even start to write down your first line of code, because you need to read through a lot of things around it, making sense of it. It's sort of like this old story of this UK engineer who draw a line on the machine, and this person cut this machine. People cut the machine open, and that's where the problem is. And software engineer and architects, we are drawing that line every day. Every work we do, every change which we make to the project was drawing that line, find where problem we need to add, right? It's the whole thing. We need to comprehend the whole thing in order to make that change of a little thing. So that has been, so that's why I think similarly, you are making software. It is software, and it's not easy to make. It's a daunting task to even be able to churn out a comprehensive design. Be it software or architecture construction drawings, and have it make sense to be buildable. It is an amazing thing to be possible. So similarly, I think you and me, we need to be very proud of what we produce. Yeah, that's what I want to say. And because as a content type of business, newspapers or books, the publishers tend to print it in a large volume. So actually they are in the business of marking up papers. They sell papers. Really, what's printed on it is not that important. Well, you have very good book and very inferior book. The prices are not very different, and the newspapers, you're actually buying that paper, not the news written on it. So imagine a very good story written, by a reporter. The publisher is going to say, "Oh, this is going to sell a lot of papers." They are actually selling paper, not the actual story on it. So think about this. Do you want to be producing content, or do you want to be producing software? If you're building content, it is to your publisher's interest to make those contents as cheap as possible. The journalism was in the eternal pain because people do not want to pay for content. Because you're consumer, right? You are facing the end consumer. You're not facing business who are waiting and capable to pay. But if you are doing software, then at least people pay. People sort of perceive value differently. That is more willing to pay. So think of yourself as you are doing consulting software. For one customer, you want to have this client, to feel your value add and then pay you for it, right? So that's what we think the value of architects is really resides in. Yes, of course, we see businesses, try to productize and duplicate the design, and you're building a lot of apartments out of a certain floor plan. But being a designer in those business, right? Your value was sort of diminished to the minimal amount. And do you want to work for them? Maybe they don't need a lot of designers too, right? You wouldn't find a lot of job there. But really, architecture design is a sort of software consulting type of practice, to me at least. So think about this, right? So the other side of things tend to get a lot of focus because the business is very scalable, because the removed architects in the consulting part, of course, is scalable. It tends to get a lot of press. Because why? Because the dollars go in there. The venture capital wants to invest in there because it's repeatable, something that, remove the people. And then you sort of churning off the machine and produce a lot of them. So they tend to get a lot of press and venture interests. But maybe value of architects in there was minimal. Well, it depends on what type of thing you want to do. Perhaps you are interested in those scalable businesses. You want to be in there, but maybe not in the design part of it, probably. But if you want to do design, you really think of yourself as doing the software.
All right. a lot of thought-provoking comments. So thanks a lot for sharing your thoughts on the show. It was great hosting you, and good luck for in the development of AI apprentices journey.
It's a pleasure.
Bye.
Bye-bye. And take care.
Yeah,
Mayur
you
and
too.
Rishabh, take care. Bye-bye.
You too. You